Good morning, and welcome to Northside Community Church Online. I'm Matisse, the Children's Director here at Northside. I want to thank you for joining us today as we learn about all that the Lord has to offer us through a sweet time of worship.
There is a river where goodness flows. There is a fountain that drowns sorrows. There is an ocean deeper than fear. The tide is rising, rising. There is a current stirring deep inside. It's overflowing from the heart of God, the flood of heaven crashing over us. The tide is rising, rising. Bursting, bursting up from the ground. We feel it now. Bursting, bursting up from the ground. We feel it now. We come alive in the river. 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 There is a current stirring deep inside. It's overflowing from the heart of God, the flood of heaven crashing over us. The tide is rising, rising. Bursting, bursting up from the ground. We feel it now. Bursting, bursting up from the ground. We feel it now. We come alive in the river. 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 Break open prison doors, set all the captives free. Spring up a well, spring up a well, spring up a well in me. Nothing can stop this joy. We're dancing in the streets. Spring up a well, spring up a well, spring up a well in me. Yeah. We come alive in the river. 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 Who am I that the highest King would welcome me? I was lost, but he brought me in. Oh, his love for me. Oh, his love for me. Who the sun sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. Free at last, he has ransomed me, his grace runs deep. While I was a slave to sin, Jesus died for me. Yes, he died for me. Who the Son set free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. In my Father's house a child of God. Yes, I am.
Good morning, Northside. This is Doug. I'm normally one of the techs hiding in the back, but today I'm out front giving you my testimony. When I was young, we went to church. We grew up in a small town of Atwater, California, about 3 hours north of here. It was a very small church, probably smaller than ours. My dad and his siblings attended as well with their families and his parents. So I think our family alone was maybe half the congregation. We stopped going around 5 or 6. When I was 5 or 6 years old, I found out later because the pastor and his wife got divorced and basically the church disbanded. I'm sure that was hard on my family, hard on my folks, and that's why we stopped going for a while. I grew up mainly secular from that point. We had Christmas and Easter, but it was just Santa and Easter Bunny. There was no Jesus really. Got to the point where in high school, the secular life had gotten to the point where I was even anti-religious. I remember writing a paper on human evolution for my freshman research paper, and thinking back just how arrogant I must have been as a teenage kid to write on such a controversial topic. My eyes started opening at that time. That English teacher I had sat me down and was reviewing the paper with me. And instead of just simply grading me and critiquing me on the writing, he was giving me counter arguments and telling me where I was wrong. And that had an impact. But beyond that, I remember him feeling hurt, and he was disappointed in me, and that had the hugest impact. I remember like it was yesterday. The feelings he put out there, that how hurt he was by how I wrote that. Next big event was my next English class, sophomore year. The teacher had us watch The Hobbit, the cartoon The Hobbit. This was before the movies, and the topic was on symbolism. And after we watched the movie, I asked the class, what does Gandalf symbolize? What symbolic figure does Gandalf represent? And I remember like thinking it was so obvious. And I remember like it was yesterday, I was looking around the class and I was waiting for someone to answer, and no one did. So I raised my hand and I said, Gandalf is Jesus. And looking back, like I hadn't been to church for 10 years. I had no Jesus in my life. But for me to come up with that, I think was pretty profound. And so my eyes were open in watching The Hobbit in English class. Next, I think my heart started opening the next year. My father brought us back to church. He found out that the same church that disbanded many years before had reformed with a new pastor, and I think that was the motivation he needed. And so we started going back to church. I wish I could say I loved it. At first I hated it with a passion. My dad had to physically drag me to the car at least once. One of the car rides we talked about tithing, and oh man, we were poor, so I just hated the idea of giving money to the church. It sounded absurd, sounded ridiculous. But we kept going. As the months went on, it became easier. Went from hating it to being okay with it to enjoying it, and then eventually looking forward to going to church. That was my heart opening, my mind opening. So physics class the next year at college was very mind opening. My physics teacher would allow us to bring a 3x5 note card for each test, and we could write down any notes, any equations, anything we wanted. And inevitably a kid would complain after each test that they forgot to write a certain equation, so that's why they got a question wrong. And she would say every time that on that same 3x5 note card you could write down every equation needed to define all the interactions in our universe. And she said it many times, but one time the weight of it just hit me. Just how profound that is, that on that note card you can easily write down everything needed to define the interactions of of planets down to the tiny aspects of an atom. And it just clicked that that's not random, that's not chaos. It's too beautiful, too simple. So that was my mind. That was my mind catching up to my heart. Soon after that, I confessed my sins and accepted Jesus. That was junior college. Went off to Fresno State, graduated, started looking for work. I got a job down here in Bakersfield, and Bakersfield was kind of lonely. Didn't know anyone in town. Tried meeting people, tried dating websites, didn't go well. I was looking for a Christian girl, I wasn't prioritizing it. And then it dawned on me one day, like I need the first check mark on a girlfriend needs to be Christian. So around that time I was using MySpace, and that was the Facebook of its day for the young kids. So I found Kathy on MySpace, and we started chatting. I learned she was Christian, and that was huge. Went on a few dates. She invited me to church, and I loved it. I felt the need to go to church, but I lacked motivation, and that was motivation I needed. We were married about 18 months later, had our first child soon after, and then Ryder. At that point, I felt the need to be baptized. I still lacked the motivation. My mind was lagging again. I felt the motivation, or lacked the motivation, until I heard we were having a family camp at a site near the Kern River, and it just felt so perfect. I can be baptized in the Kern River, in a river just like Jesus. And I talked to Ed about it. We arranged it. He thought it was a great idea. Invited my family down, my parents, my sister, and so I got baptized in the Kern River with my family, my church family. It was perfect. Reflecting back on my life, how God has made changes. I went from an arrogant secular teen that thought I could prove evolution to now I'm a God-fearing Christian man. I have a wonderful family, great Christian friends. I have a church that I truly enjoy going to. On the subject of tithing, like I can't put into words like how horrible I thought tithing was when I was a teenager. And now, once you accept that everything is a gift from God, tithing becomes easy, becomes necessary. And now we do it regularly, and I don't even have a second thought about it. That's my testimony. Hope everyone appreciated it. Thanks for listening. Have a good day. God bless.
Good morning, Pastor Tim Maddox. It's May 17th, 2020, Bakersfield, California, Northside Community Church. Just to remind you where you are if you're sitting in your living room. You know, this coronavirus pandemic has some weird effects. And I was out on a walk, and I walked by a woman, and she was holding a cat, and she was talking to that cat just like a person. And I said, wow. And so I went back to my house, and I sat down on my couch, and I began to tell my dog about what I saw. So we know that there's a lot of weird effects. We're staying home for lengths of time, and so I hope you're persevering and finding outlets to keep the stress off and to do some things. And so, I know we're not like New York or other places. We can get out and go to the store and do things, and it's not that big a deal. But here we are. We're in a series, and it's how God heals the world, how God heals us, and He heals all the worlds within the world. And I want to take a passage this morning. We're going to be in Mark chapter 1. And I want to read from that, Mark chapter 1, beginning with verse 40 through 45. A man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, "If you are willing, You can make me clean." Jesus was indignant. He reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing," he said. "Be clean." Immediately, the leprosy left him, and he was cleansed. Jesus sent him away at once and with a strong warning. "See that you tell this not to anyone, but go show yourself to the priests, offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them." Instead, he went out and began to talk freely, spreading the news. As a result, Jesus could no longer enter the town openly, but stayed outside in lonely places. Yet the people still came to him from everywhere. May the Lord add blessing to the reading of his word. So, Jesus came to the world, and as true with the theme of this series is that as he was healing the world, he did it in a certain way. And we can see it in the stories that we have of Jesus. We can see the total nature of Jesus' ministry and really the electrifying transformation that happened to people that actually bumped into him in a full way. And in those situations, Jesus was Jesus. He wasn't changed. He was as he was in that moment in history, and his reality changed people. What we do, and sometimes happens even in churches or certainly out in the culture, is that we change Jesus enough to make him comfortable for us, and we really come up with a designer Jesus, and we kind of cut and paste and just kind of modify him until he fits our specifications and fits our lives. But if we leave Jesus as he is and present him as he is and receive him as he is, then he changes us, and it's electrifying. And it is life-changing. So I want to look at this in three ways in this little story. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful little story of a man who was sick. We'll have 3 points: the total nature of Jesus' ministry, the awesome boldness of the leopard, and how our boldness can make us clean. Once again, total nature of Jesus' ministry, the awesome boldness of the leper, and how our boldness can make us clean. So let's look back at the story for just a minute. So here we are. It's a man with leprosy. That's the first 4 words in this little story of an encounter with Jesus. So really the name for leprosy is Hansen's disease. It's a disease of the body where you lose feeling, nerve endings, and you hurt yourself, and then your body is not able to repair that, and you continue to hurt yourself. You sort of injure yourself to death with it, and it's very disfiguring, and that's why there are leper colonies still to this day around the world. And but this disease has a total effect. It's not just the physical impairment and disease progression. It is also a social disease that you have to be away from others, and it also has a spiritual impact. And so as that disease is total in one sense. And so in that culture, in that first century culture, and there are sections in the Old Testament scriptures, which are for Christians, that it describes people that had leprosy and what you were to do. There were prescriptions for that from a religious perspective. And they, of course, the lepers had to be outside of the city, somewhere else. They couldn't be around because it was contagious and no human contact. Not unlike what they had their social distancing. It was just a lot further than us. And so that also made them devoid of social contact with their families and friends, perhaps they'd grown up with. And of course, there was this vacuum of intimacy that they didn't get to experience. And so, and here are some other descriptions of how it worked. If a leper was coming up upon a group of people, he was required to say this: "Unclean, unclean." Can you imagine that? Can you imagine if our government, our governor, our president told us to say, "Unclean, unclean," if you have COVID. But this is what the lepers were required to do. And the lepers were not able to go to temple. They couldn't go to church with everybody else. And by and large, they were seen as being cursed, and even cursed by God. They would put God on that because it was unclean. And in one rabbinical writing, that's the rabbis, that's Jewish scholars and pastors on the Jewish scriptures. There's a whole book called the Mishnah that's written by rabbis. And so one of their writings, it says that if a leper stands underneath a tree and then walks away, and you happen to go stand underneath that same tree, you are unclean and must go to the temple and make an offering so you can be clean again. So here's a man with leprosy. And in verse 41, it says that Jesus was indignant. He reached out his hand and touched the man. He touched the man. Now, if you have been in our services or watched our services over the last few weeks, you know that in the New Testament, Jesus could heal people from a distance with a word. He didn't even have to meet them. And that's a lot different than a wonder worker, by the way. Healed the Roman official's son by mere thought. Your son is healed. Didn't have to be in the room with him. And so here's this leper, and you got to keep safe distance. But Jesus, as this leper comes to Jesus, says he was indignant in the sense that the leper was bold, and Jesus was bold back. Jesus was bold back at the leper, and his boldness included touching. He reached out his hand and touched the man. Now, I don't know how long it had been since somebody who wasn't a leper touched him, but touch is a very important part of life. And why would Jesus not just heal him from a distance? Wouldn't that be safer? Would that be easier for Jesus? He could do that. He had just done that in other situations. It's because he was ministering to the total person. That he wasn't just healing his leprosy, he was healing far more. His total condition, the total breaking of humanity, he was after it all. And any person that's gone without human touch, and I've noticed that people I've seen, I miss giving hugs to people. I miss handshakes. I think handshakes are really cool, and a pat on the back is a good thing, and a hug is a wonderful thing. And so, physical touch, I think that's one of the love languages, right? Isn't that the love languages? Those of you that have had those courses, touch, forms of affection. What happens when a mother has a baby? They take the doctor, most of the time they take the baby and they immediately put it on the chest of the mother, so they begin to establish that bond of touch. So touch. And it's interesting when you think about Jesus' ministry. He did preach, and I'm doing that right now. He did do that, but a lot of what he did was heal people. It really was. In conversation, with miracles, and without, sometimes just conversation. Isn't that interesting? That Jesus healed people sometimes with conversation. But there was always healing that went on. And reasoning with people and restoring people to their right bodies, to the bodies that God intended them to have, to the minds. And so I think in church we encounter a couple different directions that we see in churches, and there's a couple kind of churches. So there's poles of churches, and maybe you connect with one or the other. There are some churches that are very doctrinal, very principle, very sectarian, very fundamentalist, and they're really good with the truth, and they attract people that want certainty, but they seem to struggle with compassion. They seem to almost sacrifice truth for compassion, and they're not known for that so much. And that attracts certain people. Churches attract certain people. Certainly we see that here in Bakersfield. And then, so there's that kind of church, and I know these are sort of straw men, that kind of church. And then there's also the church that was more mainline, and they have deeds of compassion and concerned about the community and all of that. But when it comes to teaching repentance or sin or salvation, silence. You can hear a pin drop. And so, what God certainly wants from us is not either or, but both and. You know, sometimes it's a false either or, but Jesus had a full, total approach to the world, a total gospel, and he would call people out. He'd call a spade a spade. He'd tell them, repent. You know, he was on that. Sin, oh my gosh, when we say that, well, Jesus is easy on sin, when you haven't read the New Testament, oh my gosh, he tells you to cut your hand off, whatever it is that's hurting you. Pull your eye out. I mean, he makes extreme suggestions about how you treat your sin, those things you do that are wrong. Of course, you have to believe something's a sin. If you don't believe it is sin, then you can keep on doing it. It's okay. But Jesus did not do that. He was very serious. The Apostle Paul, that was the same way. He was real tough on that, and at the same time, very compassionate. And so I don't think it's either or. It's truth and grace, always together, forever, because that's who Jesus was, truth and grace. And the embodied God, of course. So this fullness of ministry, Jesus was a full person. Fullness, the way he dealt with people was to bring wholeness back to their life. And to help them, to the leper he touched, right? To Martha, he told her the truth, didn't he? Different ministry. There's a touch. There's a truth moment. Mary, he cried with Mary. He gave her tears. Isn't that interesting that the complexity of God in Christ is that he knows the thing that'll speak to your heart and your mind and get your attention and heal you if you let him. If you open yourself up to that. Perfect wisdom, perfect beauty. I think that's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard of, is the way that God acts. So, sometimes people need strength. Sometimes they need tenderness. Sometimes they need the fire of God. And sometimes, Jesus was both. Jesus was tough and tender. He was a bruised reed sometimes. He was weak, struggling. He was a fire-breathing prophet the next moment. He's both. He's all of that. All of the above. A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. All of the above. That's Jesus. So, he's healing this leper with touch. And he does it in a bold way in response to what? The awesome boldness of the leper. Now, Jesus in the Gospel of Mark, if you want a gospel, maybe you're, we're all off in some sense. My wife works at home. I work at home, but I work some at the church because there's just not people around right now. We're sort of, we don't have big meetings with people, of course. And, but this, you could take your time and maybe read through the Gospel of Mark. That's a very short one. And you can see that Jesus is driving out demons. He's doing all this stuff. He's doing a lot of miraculous things, and then he's doing some teaching a lot. Some books, like Matthew, focus on a lot of his teaching. Luke also. John, in a very different way, approaches Jesus. But a lot of the stuff that Jesus did became culturally uncomfortable for him. And so we see, sometimes I used to think that Jesus was trying to hide from people. And you know what? Jesus was hiding from people because the crowds were overwhelming and he could not minister at times, so he pulled back. And we see that a lot in the gospel. And so this leper, and I try to put my heart and mind and life a little bit into the life of that leper. And so if he's living out in some leper colony outside and he hears about this Jesus, I mean, if you could just use your imagination today, hears about this Jesus and even sees people that says that he heals them, that he's been healed. That man used to be blind and now he sees, and all this stuff and people being fed and just like the Roman official that came to Jesus a couple weeks ago, he heard what Jesus did, so the leper heard, and so he went to town. Now, I don't know how he did, if he covered himself up so you couldn't see he was a leper because he had to say unclean, unclean. Maybe he just blended right in the crowd and just stayed quiet, but he had this boldness, and he just came forward to Jesus. He did. He came forward. And he was utterly desperate. He was utterly desperate. It was going to cost him something to come forward. But it was going to cost him something not to go forward. And isn't that true in our relationship with God? There's a coming forward, and there's a way that we pull back. We just want to blend in to the crowd. But this guy had to he stepped out of the crowd and asked to be healed. I don't know about you, but in our culture, we love to be skeptical. We love to be cynical. Most of our comedians are just cynics, and we all connect with that so well. But the problem with that is when our cynicism leaves us distance from God because we just know so much, and we're cynical of religion and cynical of this and cynical of that, and sometimes even cynical of Jesus, probably because you don't know him, or you're not letting Jesus be who he is. And so we don't want to be embarrassing. We don't want to stick ourselves out there, and so we hedge our bets. We want to stay pain-free. We don't want to be seen as too desperate to anybody, And so we protect ourselves. And we just like living that distant, skeptical distance. But this leper is not like that at all. He's given up on his self-respect. Like the woman last week who said, yeah, sure, call me a dog. Just heal my kid. It doesn't matter what everybody thinks of me. I already know I'm unclean. I already know I'm a mess. I'm a wreck. I'm just going to die of this stuff, and it's awful. And I can't see my family. I haven't seen my mother in years, perhaps. And so that's what happens with church. That's what happens in Bakersfield. That's what happens here sometime. We just keep our distance. Keep Jesus at arm's length. But know this, there's a cost to coming forward to Jesus. There's a cost of not going forward to Jesus and saying, God, help me. Isn't that something? And of course, in our cultures, there's a fear of commitment, fear of committing to the wrong thing or some sectarian religion or some, odd thing. But nevertheless, there still is the pulsing call of Christ to be a disciple. There's a great book called The Cost of Discipleship by Dietrich Bonhoeffer, really a martyr in the World War II, a German Christian who stood up and tried to follow Christ in that situation. But we stay away from commitment, and we're not. But what a great time. Guys, I say to you, I beg you, consider becoming a disciple of Christ. In this sequestered, I'm stuck at home, I'm collecting unemployment, I'm not sure what's going to happen next time. What a perfect time to become a disciple of Christ. Not just a believer. There's lots of believers. They used to say this in the military. It doesn't matter who's in the cafeteria. It matters who you can take to war with you. And in the sense that disciple is just that you're committed to following Christ and committed to obeying him and facing things. But we're afraid of commitment, and these parts of our life that are really uncomfortable, like our money, that's a part, our sex, that's certainly a part, and then power, the way we deal in relationships, the way we deal with ourselves and others, those three areas, power, sex, and money. There it is again in almost all of Jesus' stories directed at those things in certain ways. But if you know how sick you are, what do they have a saying in recovery? You're only as sick as your secrets. I like that saying, That's not just for recovery, that's for Christians. Actually, that's for everybody. That our sin disfigures us. Now, this leper was disfigured, but we are disfigured, We are dying, It's like the woman who found out she was dying, and then she looked in the mirror and said, yeah, but I still look good. We just kind of get these mixed up priorities, but I'm telling you that leper had his priorities. I just want to be whole. I just want to be a whole person, and and he came to Jesus. And he came and he knew Jesus could do it. He just wanted him to be willing to do it, and Jesus certainly was. And so there is this, there is some uncomfortableness with some people. There's a story of a lady, Huntington, and she had a friend of hers who was a preacher. His name was George Whitefield. He happens to be what they call the Great Awakening preacher, and so he was very good at that, very good with the gospel, and the Spirit of God seemed to be changing thousands and thousands of people all across America and England. And she would invite people over, and so she invited some of her aristocratic friends, and she got some no's. No, I don't want to come because I know he's going to tell me my heart is just as bad as those wretches on the street, that my heart is like that, and that's just not appropriate. That's just socially not appropriate. I'm not coming to your party. Wow. The kingdom is a party, isn't it? But some people don't RSVP. So we always want to negotiate our level of commitment, but here's the level of the commitment the leper had. Nothing. I give you my desperation. I give you my, oh God, heal me or kill me. I give you that, Jesus. And he comes begging. It says, go back, look at the beginning of the story. It said he came to him. He didn't just come and yell at him. He got on his knees and crawled up to him. He crawled and begged. Man, did he care what anybody thought? No, he cared. He was like the woman with her daughter. She just wanted her daughter healed. This man just wanted this leprosy out of his body. He wanted to be clean. He offered himself. So that's the gospel story for today. And how can our boldness make us clean? How can our boldness? Can't we do that too? Aren't these lessons for us? Isn't Jesus present this way in the Holy Spirit through others like this for us too? Yes. Jesus is present. He's not a person of history. Yes, he is, but he's also present in his people through his Spirit, and he is there eager to heal our lives. And so when the leper came to Jesus, he wasn't questioning Jesus' credentials or could he do it. He just wanted him to do it. And Jesus immediately, you see right there in verse 41, indignantly, he reached out and touched him. Oh, yes, I can heal you. I will heal you. You're clean. And what a beautiful picture. What an amazing human Jesus was. What a caring human he was, and how appropriate he was to every situation that occurred. The gospel has the strength to move in ways that we all need, and this cleansing occurred. And I think of another leper in the Bible. There's another leper. There's a number, but there's one in the Old Testament I really like. He was a general named Naaman from another country. He was from Syria. I like that. He's from Syria. We know that country. And so he had leprosy, and he wanted it off. And he heard over in Israel that you could go get a healing. And there was a guy over there named Elijah. He's a prophet. He lives in a shack, and you just got to go to his shack and ask him to come out and heal you. So Naaman pulls up to Elisha's shack, and because he heard about it, he drives up. No doubt he's got some soldiers with him. And it says that he had 10 talents of silver, which is an astronomical amount, and 150 pounds of gold. That's kind of the translation. And 75 pounds of fine clothing. And then Elisha comes out of the shack. And he says, I don't want your stuff. You want to be healed? Go down to that river and dunk yourself. And then he walks back into the shack. Now, I don't know when the last time a general pulled up to your house with his troops. But you kind of, for me, as an ex-military guy, I kind of want to stand at attention and talk to him and salute him and say a lot of sirs. But not Elijah. He said, you just got to go baptize yourself down there in the Jordan River. So he refused payment. That's rare. He refused payment. And the whole story is about Naaman figuring out that his pride had gotten in the way, and he thought if he went big, just go big, then you'll get the thing. And it wasn't about him at all. It was about there was a God in Israel that cared and could heal people. And you needed to humble yourself. And at least he went. But it took him a while. And finally he went down to the Jordan River and baptized him. And I stood on the Jordan River. It's not even as wide as this sanctuary. It's about half the length. And it was dirty brown when I was there that spring and standing there on the Jordan River. It's probably not a little less wide than our Kern that's running right now. It's just a narrow river. And it's pretty brown. And so it was kind of an ugly river. And I think Naaman suggests there's some other big rivers he could go to. Let's do a big show. And Elijah had nothing to say. Go baptize yourself. And finally, Naaman, of course, listens to an advisor and says, oh, you should just do what he says. Just do what he says. And so here's this leper. He comes to Jesus. He's been ostracized, and he's at Jesus' mercy. And that right there, if you get one thing from today, and I pray you let it soak on your life because it'll pay huge dividends in your life. That is the difference between religion and gospel. In religion, we work 24/7 on making ourselves clean. In gospel, you bring your uncleanness to Jesus, and he gives you cleanness. I was talking to a man about a woman he was dating, and he was describing her extreme vegetarianism. And the more I listened, the more I realized, oh my gosh, that's not a diet, that's a religion. You are clean if you eat like this. I like vegetarian, I get that, I like that, eat well. But it had become, as good things always do, it had become their way of being clean. I don't know what you do that makes you clean. And so this story, this man becomes clean, and then Jesus tells him to go to the temple. He cooperated with the existing religious establishment. Jesus went to Sabbath. Sometimes you see pictures of Jesus where he hates a church or something. It's just ludicrous. They don't know what they're talking about. I mean, he goes to church and he sends him, said, go make your offering, and then you'll be clean and you can be around the rest of us, you know. I mean, that's the real deal. It's real practical. You can come to temple now. Wow, I get to go to temple. I get to go to Jerusalem on Passover now. I've never been to one. What a cool thing. And so Jesus has it. And then what's interesting about this story is if you just kind of flip the thing for just a second, what's really interesting is the fact that Jesus did not have to go to the temple and make an offering so he could be clean. Isn't that interesting? Because Jesus had just touched a leper. And what happens, it's really clear in the Old Testament, those of you that are Bible people, you probably know this. If not, just so you know, that if you touched a leper, you had to go get yourself unclean because it was contagious. It was a contagion. It was it wasn't a pandemic, but it was a great sickness that you didn't want. But Jesus doesn't have to go because everybody that touched him became clean because his contagion, cleanness, was more powerful than anything you could bring him, whatever sickness. Do I believe that Jesus could heal all the COVID-19 people? Yeah, I do. He could heal anybody of anything. AIDS, you name the thing. He can heal you. I'm not saying he will. It's up to him. He knows what you really need. Healing comes in a lot of ways. But Jesus was cleanness and holiness in a person. In a person. And religion, maybe that's what you're doing. You just have some things that you do that makes you feel like I'm okay. I'm clean enough. Your religion may be non-religion. This is how I know I'm okay, because I'm not like those hypocrites I know about over there somewhere or something. But nevertheless, it's still minus the gospel. And Jesus just says, come to me and let me touch you. I'll make you clean. And then, of course, the leper, as most people, it's really odd, but most people don't do what Jesus says. And Jesus said, don't go tell everybody. And what does the story tell us? The disciples, he went and told everybody he could. And so, of course, he created a crowd, and Jesus couldn't go into the city, which sort of reminds me of what happened in Jesus' end, that he was crucified outside the city. He couldn't be in the city that he loved, the city that he wanted to embrace. We hear these words from Jesus, how long have I desired to embrace you, Jerusalem? And Jesus is taken out and crucified out the city. And where is he crucified? He's crucified in the dump where they burn trash. That's what Golgotha was. That's what the location was. It was where the trash and everything was burned because it was so unclean. And so he's crucified in the trash. You thought about that very much? I don't like thinking about that, but that's what we understand. He was disfigured so we could have beauty that's not even ours, that it's just a gift. What an incredible thing. And that when God does that for us, that we just desire to see that in other people, that we can bring people to Jesus. And so, if you sense that you need to be clean, come to Jesus. Ask him today. We're not here in the sanctuary, I understand that, but you can ask Jesus sitting on your couch, in your chair, behind your desk, wherever you're listening to this, and just say, Lord, I need to be clean. And if you're willing, please make me clean. What a great prayer. Every time somebody requested something of Jesus, that was really actually a prayer to God in front of them. Let's pray. Father, thank you for the day. Thank you for good weather this past week in Bakersfield. Thank you for a little bit of rain here and there. Thank you for so many things. Thank you for providing food and bread for all of us. And Lord, if there's anybody that doesn't have, help us to be good sharing Christians and help others around us. Show compassion. Listen to each other's problems. Pray with each other. Love each other. And especially in this time that's so strange. And so, Lord, we offer ourselves up to you as your followers, as your disciples, as believers. And so I thank you today for what you're going to do in our lives this day. In Christ's name,